Pale streaks of dawn crept across a sky choked with clouds of drifting metallic remains. Hundreds of years ago, during humanity's golden age of exploration, disposable satellites and defunct space stations were left to drift in orbit, forgotten. Gradually the orbits decayed, and the fragments, smashed by collisions or shattered by centuries of micrometeoroid impacts, fell into a chaotic orbit around Earth. The planet was now regularly bombarded by these lethal storms of twisted steel and pulverized composites. Long silvery trails rained fire from above, the horizon lighting up with an unsettling glow. For the survivors on Earth, these had come to be called the showers of steel. Yana crouched in the doorway of a gutted building, one of countless charred ruins in what had once been the thriving metropolis of Alcazia. Her breath rasped through a filter fashioned from cloth and plastic scraps, an effort to guard against toxic fumes. Though the city had collapsed decades prior, pockets of noxious ash still lingered in the lower levels of the ravaged streets. She listened carefully. Her hearing had grown uncanny in this world full of deadly vigilance. A distant, thunder-like rumble told her that the next meteor shower was approaching. She gripped a short spear made from a sawed-off metal rod and a sharpened piece of a shovel blade. Firearms were rare now, and if you found one, there was seldom any ammunition left. Her leather jacket was scorched on one side, riddled with tiny holes from flecks of debris that had once peppered her while she sought cover. Her face was partly hidden by a makeshift hood, her brown eyes swollen with the grit of passing storms. She glanced upward at the swirling haze. "Time to move," she whispered to no one in particular. Her only companion was a battered little device clipped around her wrist, a radiation and impact alarm that beeped softly whenever a violent atmospheric disruption was imminent. The readouts flickered with anxiety, signaling that shards might be plummeting at any moment. She scurried forward, weaving through the skeleton of what used to be an office building's lobby. Shards of tinted glass littered the ground in a mosaic of greens and blues, remnants of once inviting decor. Emerging onto the broken street, she surveyed the landscape for a safe place to hide. Her eyes darted from one collapsed skyscraper to another. Jagged spires rose crookedly into the gloom, their angles twisted. Above them, the strobing orange glow of friction-heated metal was beginning to paint the clouds. She caught a glimpse of shimmering debris, a white-hot piece of a thruster casing, perhaps flying overhead. A streak of sparks followed in its wake. The sight made her stomach lurch. She did not want to be out in the open when the main bombardment arrived. Long ago, the city had built an extensive system of subterranean transit rails. Most tunnels were caved in or entirely flooded, but every now and then a portion remained intact. If she could find one that opened near this block, she might have a chance to ride out the storm. She sprinted across the intersection, peering around for an entrance to any old station. When she found one, it was blocked by collapsed concrete. Her pulse quickened. A deep vibration reverberated in the air, as if the sky itself was growling in anger. "Calm down," she commanded herself. "There's always something." She scanned the base of a nearby tower, noticing a hole gaping in the side of its foundation. Perhaps some portion of the basement was still stable enough to use as a shelter. The roar in the clouds above intensified. She could now see flecks of bright metal scattering across the atmosphere, glowing and fading in quick bursts. "Hang on, you can make it," she thought. She ducked through the hole, stepping carefully down into a cavern of smashed concrete and wires, and the remains of an underground parking level. Decades of dust layered every surface. Broken pipes jutted from the ceiling. She moved farther back, drawn by the shape of corridors that led deeper beneath the structure. The air was dank, but it was thicker and smelled slightly less toxic than the outside. Good enough, she decided. She braced for the onslaught to come. Then it began. The staccato clatter of thousands of metal shards and defunct rocket stages slamming into the upper story. Impossibly loud bangs and screeches tore into her ears. With her back pressed to a wall, Yana held her breath, counting slow beats. Each second magnified her tension. The building groaned, dust raining from thin cracks overhead. She worried the entire structure might buckle, but there was nowhere else to go. She stayed motionless, enduring the cacophony until it gradually passed, replaced by the weaker patter of smaller fragments. At length the howl above subsided. Sunlight, tinted by a rust-colored haze, filtered through the hole she had come in. She waited a moment, letting her trembling ease, then stood, dusting herself off. The temperature felt a few degrees higher, that was typical after a shower, as friction heated metal and airborne toxins spread through the air. She couldn't stay in this basement too long, or she might succumb to the radiation seeping from certain fragments. Already her wrist alarm was blinking faster than usual. Cautiously, she emerged from the bowels of the building. She rummaged through the rubble, ever hopeful there might be salvageable supplies. Once upon a time, the old towers had housed shops, offices, and small restaurants. She pressed deeper into the husk of the upper floors, her boots crunching on broken stone. The elevator shaft was a gaping well, cables long since snapped. She turned away, noticing something flicker in her peripheral vision. A reflection, a gleam of something metallic. She crept forward, adrenaline flooding her system, ready to fight if needed. Rounding a corner, she saw it, a large shard of space junk, half embedded in the floor. The glowing edges smoked, throwing off sparks and a faint hiss. It smelled sharp and acrid, reminiscent of scorched metal and chemicals. She stepped back warily. Radiation spiked her wrist alarm. That chunk would be too hot to approach safely. She retreated, not wanting to risk absorbing more contamination than necessary. Something else caught her eye. Light flickering behind a pile of debris in a corridor. Flames, perhaps? That could be dangerous, or it could be evidence that someone was there. She considered turning around to avoid trouble, but the memory of ration packs and other ruined spots pushed her forward. If someone was cooking, maybe they had extra. She listened closely for movement, but heard nothing amid the crackles of burning fragments. Quietly, she edged toward the glow. She found a small camp stove rig balanced on a piece of shattered masonry. It gave off a flickering flame. Next to it was a battered tin pot. Atop the flame, the contents gently bubbling. She stared, half in disbelief. It was a simple setup, but to find it in the open was unexpected. Where was its owner? "Hello?" she ventured softly, readying her spear. A moment of silence, then a rustle from behind a partially collapsed wall. She stepped forward. That was when a shadow leapt out, brandishing a rusted dagger. She gasped, reeling back just in time to avoid a slash to her belly. "Stay away!" the figure barked in a voice muffled by a heavy scarf. She couldn't see who it was through the dust and gloom, but the person's grip on the dagger was shaky. "I'm not looking for a fight," Yana said, hands raised. She lowered her spear's tip, indicating she intended no harm. "I just saw the light." The stranger's eyes flickered nervously, glancing from her spear to the wrist alarm on her arm. With a few uncertain steps, they lowered the dagger, though they kept a defensive posture. "Who are you?" "Yana. I'm just passing through and trying to survive the showers." "Your stove caught my eye." Carefully, she turned her spear away, resting its tip against the ground. The tension in the air lingered, but not so heavily that either of them would strike unprovoked. "I mean no harm." The stranger pulled the scarf down. A young man, perhaps in his early 20s, face smudged with grime and fear. "I call myself Ilias," he said. "Why are you skulking around here?" "I needed shelter from the shower," she answered. "We were both trying to do the same, I guess." She gestured at the pot. "What's cooking?" Ilias regarded her warily, then glanced at the pot. "A can of beans I found." He paused, as though deciding whether sharing would be wise. "Not much, but I can spare a bit. Maybe you have something to trade." She nodded. She had some dried jerky in her satchel, along with a few pieces of corroded electronics that might be worthwhile in bartering. The two set up a cautious exchange, eyeing each other while they ate. The beans were watery and slightly burnt, but to her it tasted nearly divine. Warm, simple food. In return, she gave him a small chunk of tough jerky. He accepted it with a guarded nod. They heard an ominous clink from above as a fragment of debris settled through a charred hole in the roof. Ilias jumped, and Yana stiffened. When no further destruction came, they both exhaled. The tension of living under a sky that rained steel was always present, even if subconsciously. It gnawed at their nerves. "You're traveling alone?" he asked, once they'd finished a few bites. She shrugged. "No choice. My group was attacked a while back. We were in a settlement by the old canal. Raiders took it over." She grimaced. "They came after the farmland and the building materials. Left a few of us wandering. I storm-hopped across the region for weeks, lost track of everyone else." He stared into his pot as if remembering his own horrors. "I was part of a salvage team once. We roamed the perimeter of cities, collecting fragments to sell. Lost them all one night to a freak storm. Then, I just kept going." They lapsed into silence, finishing the meager meal. Afterwards, she offered him a suggestion. "We might fare better traveling together, at least as far as the next safe zone, if we find one. There's rumored to be a place outside the city with thick bunkers or hidden mines. People say they carved entire compartments underground, using old infrastructure. Might be worth looking for." He ran his hand through his dirty hair, uncertain. "It's dangerous trusting strangers." "So is trying to outrun the storms alone?" she said, leaning forward. "Listen, I can handle myself and you have that cooking gear. We can watch each other's back. We can keep an eye out if either of us is about to lose it." She uttered a small, humorless laugh. "Up to you. Not many choices these days." He weighed the offer, then slowly nodded. "All right, we can give it a try." They decided to stay beneath the roof overnight. While still on edge, they managed to doze lightly, trading shifts to keep watch for any fresh storms or potential intruders. The next morning, the sky was a dull wash of gray, tinted with the faint sparkle of floating fragments. Yana and Ilias gathered their scant belongings. Before setting out, Yana consulted her wrist alarm for radiation readings. It still flickered a warning, but the danger was not extreme. They traversed the roads cautiously, mindful that the storms had ripped open entire sections of the pavement. Jagged rebar sprouted from battered concrete like gnarled fingers. Along the way, they witnessed the fresh wreckage from the previous day's debris shower. Smoldering hunks of twisted metal embedded in the sidewalks, shattered windows raining glass with every small gust. Despite the devastation, there were signs of life. Wild vines clung to the remains of smaller structures, and scrawny rodents darted among the debris. Here and there they spotted footprints that weren't theirs, humans or raiders. It was impossible to know. They kept their weapons at the ready, scanning corners and rooftops. Several hours passed before they found themselves near the city's outer districts. Buildings were more spaced out here, once residential suburbs. Most had collapsed under repeated bombardments. A few stood precariously, leaning at odd angles. They found a highway ramp that led to a half-buried roadway. Grassam Highway. The sign read, letters chipped away by centuries of storms. This was rumored to lead toward the zone where bunkers might exist. As they moved onto the ramp, a sudden echo of gunfire snapped through the air. Yana and Ilias dove behind the rusted carcass of a car. Heart-pounding, Yana peered around the corner, her eyes searching for the source. Through the swirling dust, she saw 3 figures on the overpass, each armed with rifles that glinted ominously in the weak sunlight. They wore patchwork armor made from scrap metal. Raiders. One of them spotted movement below. The vantage gave him a clear view. More shots rang out, pinging off the car frame and sending sparks flying. Yana cursed under her breath. The 2 were outgunned, and with the open road around them, there was no easy way to flank. She gestured for Ilias to keep low. He nodded, clutching his dagger. They waited for a pause in the fire. Then, before the raiders could reload, they sprinted along the side of the ramp, ducking behind support pillars. Another round of bullets cracked concrete and ricocheted. Dust plumed. Yana realized these raiders were well armed. Somehow they'd come into a stash of ammunition. She glimpsed the muzzle flashes. The group was spread out, controlling the overpass. Retreating might be the sensible option, but she caught a flicker of motion in the sky. The next meteor wave was on approach. If they stayed in the open, they'd be shredded. They needed to find shelter, and soon. Ahead, Ilias spotted a break in the guardrail, leading down to what looked like an overgrown ditch. He pointed frantically. She nodded, and together they dashed that way, ignoring the searing burn in their legs. The raiders above continued firing, though the angle seemed unfavorable. Bullets whistled overhead. One found its mark, grazing the side of Yana's calf. She clenched her jaw, ignoring the pain as adrenaline surged. They tumbled down the slope into the ditch, landing amid damp weeds and twisted chunks of old pylons. Winded, but alive, they crawled under a thick section of collapsed roadway. Darkness enveloped them, only narrow slivers of daylight streaming through cracks. Gunfire rattled above, but echoes of thunder from the sky signaled that the real threat was moments away. Yana placed a hand on her calf. The graze was messy but not deep. She ripped a strip from her sleeve and tied it around the wound. "Stay put," she whispered. "This might hold up against the smaller debris, but if anything bigger hits directly, it's over." He nodded. They cowered there, hearts pounding, as the hollow crash of metal on stone erupted. The world above roared with a new storm of falling fragments. Some impacted with the roadway overhead, each collision sending vibrations through the slab that covered them. Chilling shrieks reverberated as shards ricocheted off rebar. An avalanche of rubble spilled around them. They squeezed their eyes shut, bracing against the deafening assault. When the deluge finally relented, they opened their eyes, coughing on the thick dust that hung in the air. Flames flickered somewhere above. The sound of gunfire had ceased, replaced by a dreadful silence. Carefully, they wriggled out from under the collapsed concrete, scanning for any sign of the raiders. The overpass was half sheared away, a gaping wound exposing twisted rods. Pieces of smoldering metal littered the surface, and the bodies of at least 2 raiders lay motionless. One teetered precariously on the edge of a broken ledge, his rifle slipping into the void below. Yana and Ilias climbed carefully, searching the corpses for usable supplies. A battered canteen, a handful of bullets, enough to load maybe 1 or 2 shots if they found a working rifle. Ilias retrieved a cracked rifle from under a slab, but it jammed badly when he tested the bolt. However, out of desperation, he kept it. As they scanned the horizon, the path ahead didn't look promising. The highway was shattered beyond recognition. Giant craters punctuated the terrain. Beyond, a faint haze suggested further toxic pockets. They descended along the highway's edge, forging ahead, their goal, to find the rumored bunkers. While the storms happened unpredictably, some of the largest were said to be cyclical, with bigger intervals in between. If they could travel a good distance before the next major bombardment, they might have a shot at discovering a safer place. Night fell swiftly, and the temperature plummeted. A chill draped the city outskirts as they tread between the rotted remains of neighborhood homes. Most were little more than collapsed wooden skeletons, but they eventually found a single-level structure that looked slightly intact. The roof had caved in part way, yet some walls stood. Exhaustion forced them to rest there, though both felt uneasy about the half-exposed ceiling. During the night, Yana jerked awake to a sound. She froze, listening. A faint scraping noise came from somewhere outside. She nudged Ilias, and he stirred, blinking in alarm. They peered through an opening, seeing nothing at first. Then a shape materialized from behind a broken fence. A wild dog, or more precisely, a canine mutated by generations of radiation exposure. Its fur was patchy, and its eyes glowed eerily in the moonlight. It sniffed the air, likely drawn by their scent. Yana bit her lip, silently hoping it would move on. 2 more emerged, glimpses of bared teeth in the pale glow. She could practically smell their hunger. She remembered how feral these mutated dogs could be, especially if they roamed in packs. Ilias slowly raised the jammed rifle, hoping to startle them if needed. Yana clutched their spear, adrenaline surging again. The lead dog stepped closer, growling low. Yana saw ribs poking through its thin hide. Its muzzle twitched, and it let out a ragged snarl. Trying to avoid a direct confrontation, she scooped up a stone and hurled it. The rock clattered loudly to the side, momentarily distracting the animals. They looked that way, then back to the shelter. She hefted another stone, preparing to repeat the maneuver. A whimper from one of the dogs signaled a subtle shift. The pack glanced nervously at something in the distance. The distant rumble of yet another meteor wave, perhaps. With an agitated bark, they slunk away, presumably deciding that the looming threat from the sky was more urgent than chasing these humans. Yana let out a silent sigh of relief. As dawn approached, the two travelers resumed their journey. They trekked along an old freight rail that ran parallel to the highway, mindful of stray pieces of debris. By midday, the land started dipping into wide gullies, evidence of once unaccepted waterways. The tunnels or bunkers they had heard about might lie somewhere in these gullies or further beyond. After a few more hours, they found what appeared to be a heavy steel door set into a rock face, partially hidden by undergrowth. A scatter of old tracks led to it, as if cargo once moved in and out. Yana felt her pulse quicken. Could this be one of the rumored sealed entrances? She pressed her ear to the cold metal. Silence. She tried the handle, but it was locked tight. Ilias knelt beside the door, examining the corroded hinges. If they applied force, they might get in. They gathered some tools, a length of pipe and a chunk of concrete, and began pounding where rust had eaten away at the mechanism. It took a solid half-hour of grueling effort to wedge the door ajar. The hinges screeched in protest, echoing in the darkness within. A gust of stale air poured out, carrying the scent of mold and decay. The interior was a corridor, descending at a shallow angle. Flashlights were a luxury they didn't have, so they relied on a small oil lamp Lilius carried, plus some rags dipped in flammable fluid. Together, they ventured inside, hearts pounding in their ears. The corridor led to a large open chamber lined with thick walls. It was a storage facility built underground, presumably during the city's heyday. Crates and old machinery lay scattered about, coated in thick layers of dust. Much of it was rotted or rusted beyond use, but the space was substantial. A quick inspection suggested that the overhead was built from reinforced concrete. If this place hadn't collapsed yet, it might stand against future storms. Yana's eyes widened when her makeshift torch illuminated a row of sealed metal cabinets against the far wall. She pried one open, revealing racks of tarnished tools, mostly shattered from age, but a few still looked functional. Ilias, meanwhile, found a couple of steel boxes in another corner. After some fiddling, he managed to open one. His smile flashed. Inside lay packs of freeze-dried rations, vacuum seals intact despite the centuries, possibly left over from the days of civil defense stockpiles. This could be it, Ilias whispered, hardly daring to believe. We might have found a safe place. We can't be sure yet, she said, though the relief in her voice was palpable. We should explore deeper, make sure nothing down here is going to kill us. Then we can see about sealing the entrance, or at least making it secure. She could already imagine a portion of the future having a shelter that might last more than a few hours, was something she hadn't dared dream about. Just be cautious, she reminded him. They pressed forward through a smaller tunnel branching off one side. The air grew colder, almost damp. Strange scraping sounds made them pause, only to find it was the echo of water dripping from a pipe overhead. The corridor ended at another locked barrier, but this one looked simpler, just a rusted gate across the path. They forced it open. Beyond, they found a subchamber that seemed fitted with large, rusting coolant tanks. Yana guessed it might be part of an old cryogenic system or power station. Suddenly, the lamp's light fell upon a cluster of shapes slumped against the wall. Skeletal remains, perhaps 4 or 5. Tattered garments clung to their bones. They looked to have been here for decades, if not centuries. Scratch marks on the walls suggested a desperate attempt to escape. A shiver traveled down Yana's spine. She pursed her lips, stepping around carefully. They must have been trapped here when everything came apart, Ilias murmured. No way out, or no one to let them out. Yana nodded, solemn. She noticed one skeleton's hand clenched around a small metallic object. Leaning in, she discovered it was a battered notebook with a hinged clasp. Out of curiosity, she pried it from the brittle fingers. Most pages were rotted, stuck together, but glimpses showed cramped handwriting, diagrams, references to the layers of orbit, debris patterns, survival instructions. One phrase stood out amid the scribbles. The sky is falling, no time left, generations doomed by our own legacy. She closed the notebook gently, setting it aside. The lamp flickered, and she felt a surge of grief for these unknown souls haunting this subterranean tomb. Yet the existence of these remains offered some clue. They had tried to survive here, and maybe had for some time. She would not let that fate be hers, nor Ilias's, if she could help it. They retreated to the main chamber, speaking in hushed tones about what to do next. The place was large enough that they might carve out living quarters. Sealing the main door more effectively would be their first priority. Then, they would check if the vents still connected to a safe air supply. If they could keep the air somewhat clean and block radiation-laden dust from drifting inside, they might be able to survive multiple storms. The stock of freeze-dried rations, while limited, was a gift from fate. Later that evening, they worked to seal the door, using salvaged metal beams and pieces of broken machinery to fortify the entrance. Every clang of metal on metal echoed through the halls, but they pressed on, determined. They nearly finished the job when the next storm declared itself with a violent roar overhead. Enduring the fear of being crushed underground, they held their breath. The walls quivered but did not cave. Hours later, when the noise faded, the bunker still stood. Exhausted relief overtook them. For the first time in what felt like ages, Yana allowed herself to hope. She sank onto a piece of scrap that acted as a makeshift bench. Her gaze drifted to Ilias, who stood leaning against the massive door. He looked as tired as she felt, though his eyes shared a similar glimmer of cautious optimism. She swallowed hard. "I guess we stay now," she said, a note of wonder in her voice. "We can try to make this a home, or at least a refuge, gather enough supplies. Maybe there are other pockets of survivors out there we can bring here." Ilias nodded slowly, stirring the lamp's flame, letting it brighten the corridor. "We might have found an anchor. Somewhere the storms can't reach us so easily." They looked at each other, uncertain if they dared to believe in a future, but for the moment they were alive, and they had shelter. The next wave of debris would come, as it always did. But for now, they had a fighting chance. In a world ravaged by steel showers, that was everything.